Welcome to Swords and Hammers. Truth comes clothed in tales, and the soul remembers what the mind alone forgets. The world is loud, but for the next few minutes, it can wait. Take a moment. Settle yourself. Listen well. Come, let us begin. The fire in the bones. An ancient secret from the world's darkest prison. In the summer heat of Rome, if you walked through the Forum and happened to glance down, you might notice a circular metal grate, no bigger than a shield. Most people passed without a second thought. They had no idea. They were walking over one of the most terrifying places in the empire. 20 feet below their sandals, in absolute darkness, an old man was dying. This is the true story of what he wrote in that darkness, and why his words still burn today. The dungeon. The Mamertine wasn't built to hold prisoners. It was built to crush them. 2 chambers, stacked like a nightmare. The upper chamber had no windows, just stone walls that wept with moisture. But the lower chamber, that was something else. The only way in was through a hole in the floor. Guards would lower you down on ropes, and once you were down, that was it. You were in a circular stone tomb, 6.5 feet high, carved from solid rock. The floor was often covered in human waste from previous prisoners. The walls were slick with slime. The air was so foul that guards would vomit just opening the hole, and the only light, if you could call it that, came from that grate, filtered through 2 stories of stone. They say you could hear the prisoners before you could see them. Not screaming. That stopped after the first day. Just this low, animal moaning. The sound of souls being slowly crushed. In the summer of 67, they lowered an old Jewish teacher named Paul into that hole. He'd been causing trouble throughout the empire for 30 years. Everywhere he went, strange things happened. Cities rioted. People claimed miraculous healings. Entire communities abandoned their ancestral gods. The Romans had finally had enough. Paul knew what came next. Every prisoner in the infamous Mamertine knew. Any day now, they'd pull him up through that hole, march him outside the city walls, and a soldier with a very sharp sword would remove his head from his shoulders. But Paul did something no other prisoner had ever done in that dungeon. He asked for writing materials. The letter. Over 800 miles away, a younger man named Timothy was experiencing a different kind of death. Not the quick death of the sword, but the slow death of a dying fire. Timothy was trying to lead believers in Ephesus, home of the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the world. The silversmiths, who made their fortune from pilgrims, wanted him dead. The local authorities wanted him silenced, and now Emperor Nero had started using believers as human torches for his garden parties. I'm not exaggerating. The historian Tacitus recorded it. Nero would cover them in pitch and set them on fire while they were still alive. Timothy was starting to feel something worse than fear. He was feeling the cold. You know the feeling. It starts at the edges of your soul and creeps inward. Your prayers become mechanical. Your faith feels like pretense. The fire that once burned in your chest, that passionate certainty that made you willing to risk everything, dims to barely a flicker. You go through the motions, but inside, you're freezing to death. This is spiritual hypothermia, and Timothy had it bad. Then the letter arrived from Rome, from Paul, from the dungeon. The Theological Foundation. What Paul wrote should have been impossible. A man sitting in human waste, in absolute darkness, days from execution, writing to someone who might be next. You would expect fear, you would expect dread, desperation, even rage, maybe even some last-minute theological second thoughts. Instead, Paul wrote something that reveals the deepest structure of spiritual reality. He begins with, therefore, that magnificent word that connects everything to God's eternal purpose. The Greek dio means he's about to draw an inevitable conclusion from unshakable premises. This isn't advice. It's doctrinal logic applied to desperate circumstances. Timothy, he wrote, I need to remind you of something. That fire inside you, the gift of God, you need to blow on those coals. You need to fan them back to life. But notice, Paul calls it the gift of God. The Greek charisma tou theou is precise theological language. This isn't a natural talent or human potential. It's the supernatural endowment of the Holy Spirit himself, given at conversion, sealed by apostolic authority. Paul is referring to nothing less than the indwelling presence of the third person of the Trinity. Without this theological reality, if this is merely human courage or positive thinking, then Paul's command is cruel mockery to a dying man. The Greek word he used for stir up, anasopyron, appears nowhere else in ancient literature. Paul invented it. Right there, in the worst place on earth, he created a new word for bringing dead fires back to life. The prefix ana means up again, and zopirein means to kindle fire. It's a present active infinitive, continuous action, personal responsibility. Then he dropped the diagnosis that changed everything. God has not given you a spirit of fear. Stop. Read that again. Paul isn't saying, don't be afraid or be brave. He's making a categorical theological statement about the source and nature of spiritual influence. The perfect tense, has not given, indicates a completed action, with ongoing results. God's settled decision, made in eternity, is that his children will not receive from him a spirit of cowardice. That paralyzing terror Timothy was feeling. That voice telling him to run. Hide. Give up. Paul's diagnosis is theological, not psychological. It's not from God. It's an invasion, an alien spirit, a parasitic force that feeds on dying fires. The word delia, cowardice, is set in absolute opposition to God's character. God cannot give what contradicts his nature, and his nature is courage, not cowardice. The threefold antidote. God has not given us a spirit of fear, Paul wrote, his words barely visible in the darkness, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Here Paul employs the strongest adversative in Greek, alla meaning but on the contrary. He's not merely adding to his statement, he's presenting the complete antithesis. 3 ingredients, a formula written in blood and proven in dungeons, and the order matters. Each builds on the previous. Power, dunamis. This is the first antidote, because without divine power, everything else fails. Paul deliberately chooses the word from which we derive dynamite. But it means more than explosive force. In the Septuagint, it's the word used for God's creative power in Genesis, his delivering power in Exodus, his sustaining power in the Psalms. It's the same word used for the power of Christ's resurrection in Ephesians 1:19-20. Paul is making an astounding claim. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead is resident, present tense, in every believer. Not available upon request, but already deposited. The theological implications are staggering. If God's omnipotence indwells you, then fear of finite powers becomes irrational. You're not asking for power. You're sitting on dynamite, afraid to light the match. Love. Agape. This isn't sentiment, but divine nature. Paul places it second, because power without love becomes tyranny. This is the love that defines intra-Trinitarian relationships. The Father's love for the Son, the Son's love for the Father, the Spirit's love that binds them. When Paul says, God has given us a spirit of love, he means we've been made participants in the very love that holds the universe together. This love is the perfect antidote to fear, because fear, at its root, is self-referential. Fear always asks, what will happen to me? Love asks, how can I glorify God and serve others? When you're consumed with love for something eternal, temporary threats lose their terror. Paul knew this love. It's why he could sit in that dungeon without despair. A sound mind, sophronismos. This word appears only here in the New Testament. It means more than clear thinking. It means a mind that has been restored to its proper function, seeing reality through God's perspective. There in that dungeon, surrounded by the moaning of the dying, Paul's mind was crystal clear because it was anchored in eternal truth. Paul could see what fear blinds us to. His body might be in chains, but his spirit was free. Rome might kill him tomorrow, but the kingdom was advancing. The darkness might be absolute, but the light he carried could never be extinguished. This wasn't positive thinking. This was divine equipment, standard issue for every believer. The tragedy wasn't that Timothy lacked these things. The tragedy was that he'd forgotten he had them. The command and its execution. From the depths of the Mamertine, Paul issued an order that echoes through time. Stir up the gift of God which is in you. The grammar here is crucial. This is an imperative, a command, but its middle voice, meaning Timothy must act upon something within himself. Not generate new fire, not create courage from nothing, but rather stir up what's already there. But here's the theological precision that makes this work. The fire never dies completely. It can't. What God ignites, no dungeon can extinguish. Paul knew this from Romans 11:29. The gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. The fire can burn so low that you forget it exists. It can be buried under so much ash, disappointment, failure, fear, that you think it's gone. Paul was telling Timothy, get on your knees, clear away the ash, blow on those coals, feed them with prayer, real prayer, not religious repetition, but desperate conversation with the living God. Add the fuel of truth, meditating on who God actually is versus who fear tells you he is. Clear away the wet leaves of sin and distraction that threaten to smother what's left. The fire is there. It's always been there. Your job isn't to create it. Your job is to tend it. This is the paradox of divine sovereignty and human responsibility that runs through all Scripture. God provides the fire, but he dignifies us with the responsibility of tending it. What happened next? History tells us that Paul was executed shortly after writing this letter. They took him to a place called Aquae Salviae, 3 miles outside Rome. One swing of a Roman sword, and the apostle was gone. But what about Timothy? Timothy received that letter. He read those words from the dungeon, and something inside him caught fire again. Church tradition tells us that Timothy stayed in Ephesus for decades. They beat him. They dragged him through the streets. They tried everything to put out his fire. They failed. Because Timothy had learned the secret from the dungeon, the spirit of fear is an invader, but the Spirit of God, with His power, His love, His clear sight, He's already inside. The fire is there. You just have to tend it. The fire that never dies. The Mamertine dungeon still exists. One can still visit it in Rome, descend those ancient stairs, stand in that terrible lower chamber. Tourists last about 5 minutes before they have to leave. The darkness is still oppressive. The walls still weep. But something else remains too. In that place of absolute darkness, a man discovered that what God kindles, no power in heaven or earth can extinguish. In that tomb, built to break souls, Paul proved that the human spirit, when inhabited by the divine Spirit, becomes unbreakable. The spirit of fear still operates today. It doesn't need dungeons. It whispers that you're not enough, that the opposition is too strong, that the fire inside you is dying or dead. But Paul's words from the Mamertine echo across 2,000 years with theological certainty. Fear isn't from God. He's given you something else. Power that can reshape reality, His own omnipotence. Love that conquers terror, His own nature. A mind that sees clearly when all hell breaks loose, His own perspective. The fire is there. Maybe it's burning low, hidden under years of ash. Maybe you can barely feel its warmth anymore. But if you're willing to get on your knees, clear away the debris, and blow on those coals, what Paul discovered in the dungeon remains theologically and experientially true. What God ignites, nothing can extinguish. Not Rome, not dungeons, not even death itself. The fire is in your bones. Fan the flame. Selah.